So, hello and welcome to another Strathclyde Inspire podcast. As chair of a recent Strathclyde Inspire event, I've been invited back to continue the fireside chat we had with a fantastic entrepreneur and Strathclyde graduate, Allan Cannon from Crucial, formerly known as R3 IoT. Welcome, Allan.
Thank you, David.
So at the event, we talked a little bit about growth as an entrepreneur, Allan's journey to where he is today, and briefly touched on the effects of globalisation on business today. So today we'll delve into that a little bit more, but we also want to talk about entrepreneurial ambition and discuss Allan's experience, and I'll bring some of my own experience to that journey as well. So let me introduce myself. My name is David Bowie. I've got a background in international healthcare, medical products, medical devices, and international business. Lived and worked abroad and worked for some larger companies, but also for the last 18 years have been involved in startups. So be very interested to dig a bit deeper. Allan, maybe you could just give us a bit of your background as well.
Yeah, so as you mentioned, David, started off my kind of educational career here at Strathclyde, studying physics and then going on to study physics and RF science, which was a master's degree, to help people go into industry. I then went into industry, which was great. KPI delivered. And I went down to Bristol and I spent the last 11 years working for a defence and aerospace company, working with the MOD, Department for Defence, various different, so essentially applying my skills firstly as a physicist, but then as a systems engineer, helping essentially rapidly develop technologies from essentially paper concepts into demonstration projects, which essentially has probably helped me in the entrepreneurial journey, but we can come on to that later. I then moved back to Glasgow, where I joined a company called Clyde Space, actually one of the first space companies here in Scotland, and essentially the start of the fantastic space industry here in Scotland, which employs a lot of people now. Strathclyde's been a big factor in that as well. I was there for 2.5 years. While I was there, I met my current business partner, Kevin Quillian, and we decided to take the brave step and start our business, and that was in 2018. And to be honest, never looked back. So.
Brilliant. No, brilliant. And I'm sure this is going to be quite an interesting discussion that we can have that will resonate with the listeners and viewers of this particular podcast. But let's start with one of the things that we talked about at the Strathclyde Inspire event, and you've alluded to it just now as well a little bit. Entrepreneurial ambition. You know, you mentioned there taking a brave step, to build a startup. You know, with Kevin. Brave, or foolhardy, or
well, I guess hindsight maybe foolhardy, but I think no. At the time, it was a niche that had to be scratched from my perspective. But also, we were exposed to the global kind of space industry and what was going on in that market, and the fantastic new space technologies that were going on to orbit, as well as a lot of the startups that were being created to leverage some of these new technologies. So we were exposed to the kind of space industry from a global sense, as part of our roles within Clyde Space. And we started to see things like startups who were based in Silicon Valley, startups that were based in Canada, essentially raising seed funding, quite a lot of seed funding, using that seed funding to essentially prove their technology on orbit and then raise some more money. And their plans were essentially, put one satellite up and then raise enough money to build a constellation, which requires a lot of ambition. So we were exposed to that, and I was also lucky enough to have a number of early on in our entrepreneurial journey, have a number of advisors who were based outside of the UK who gave us an international perspective on starting a business. So how to raise money, where to go for money, what's the things that you need to do in the very early stages to plan for building a global company. So we started off when we started the business, not just to build a Scottish company or a UK company, but to build a global company. So we tried to think globally from the outset, and that's kind of where.
That's a very interesting one. It's actually having that vision that from the get-go, it's a global company. You're not just competing within our very creative and very successful country, but you had that ambition. And do you think that ambition you had already with Kevin, or do you think it was, as you've just said, exposure in previous jobs, or I suppose, to the advisors you had, to some of the partners that you were talking to who were already global?
Yeah, I think that it's a mixture of both, to be honest. We had been exposed to different environments through our careers, through the space industry, through previous roles, working abroad for various things. So that global experience was already there. And then I think the bit that also helped us was the advice, and the advice coming from people that had been had been around the block a few times, had been involved in growing larger businesses. And I think that's a really important point for any entrepreneur out there who's starting a business, is that you need to get out of your local ecosystem and go and explore how large successful businesses are grown, and what it takes, because what we don't have here in Scotland is a very mature ecosystem, and therefore entrepreneurs, in order to understand exactly what it takes to grow a multi-billion-dollar business, have to go where there's been other multi-billion-dollar businesses growing, and also go and speak to other founders who have grown multi-billion-dollar businesses, go and speak to investors who have invested in multi-billion-dollar businesses. So it's like, if you want to know how to do that, you have to go to where it's happening. And unfortunately, at this point in time, we're not quite there. There's only been 3 unicorns here in Scotland to date. We're starting to see some of that come back into the ecosystem, but we had to go out and find it. And to really understand that now, I think that was the
so interesting. There's a whole load of stuff that we could unpick there, actually. Very interesting point you said about our ecosystem not being mature. I think there'll be some people listening who will go, well, it's been around for a long time. Now, been around for a long time doesn't necessarily mean mature. And then that's your point about where can we learn from? We need to go out. But our ecosystem is actually quite strong in Scotland.
Absolutely.
But, and this is the bit that some of our listeners may agree or disagree with, but we tend to look within ourselves a lot of the times, I think. How do we encourage people, or how do we embolden people, I suppose, to break down, if you like, the geographical barriers, which I might actually put some limits in our minds sometimes. And as you said, just go and find those people that have done it before, not necessarily in your exact business or even in your exact sector, but just act like a sponge and just soak up as much of that global experience as possible. How do we enable that?
I think founder education is a key part of this. We have to acknowledge as an ecosystem that education is key to producing more successful entrepreneurs. If I was to go use my own experience here, is like one of the things that we were involved in really early on was it's called the IGAP program. It was run by Strathclyde. It's through the Strathclyde Business School Growth Advantage program, and that provided us with the opportunity to work with other peer entrepreneurs who had gone through the journey or were going through the journey and were slightly ahead of us. So could start to signpost us to say, oh, don't do this, do this. We've made this mistake. And that peer learning was a key part for our early stage understanding of what to do. But then, going back to the kind of, understanding, okay, there's so many things as an entrepreneur that you have to do, and education is, okay, what does that actually mean, right? But it's things like, where do I get my financing from? How to hire the right team, what's the product journey that we're building here? There's so many different areas to, focus on. Who's the right advisor? Who's the right lawyer? The right, etc. to bring in. It's such a...
I just wanted to jump in at that point, because in my experience, being on both sides, advising and mentoring, as well as still learning and wanting to be mentored, actually there isn't ever one right person, is there? No. I think one of the skills of an entrepreneur, and hopefully you'll agree with this, is you've got to filter a lot of information for a lot of people, and not just chop and change when someone says something that's slightly different or completely different.
That's the big piece of advice I always give, is go out and seek lots of different different opinions and advice. And I think that if you always stay, and I'm going to use the localization part here, so if you always stay in your local ecosystem, you're only going to get advice based on that local ecosystem. If you go outside that ecosystem to Silicon Valley, or you go to London, or you go to New York and ask for advice, you'll get a different set of advice, whereas here you might get, if you go to speak to 10 people, you might get 10 roughly the same pieces of advice. So I think it's important for an entrepreneur to get as much different advice from different backgrounds. If you're asking lots of different founders, for example, go and speak to founders that have grown marketplaces, and software companies and hardware companies have raised money in different parts of the world, have tackled the venture building problem in a different way. For example, they've bootstrapped, or they've raised very early, or they've avoided VC, or because there's no one right answer.
No.
So all advice is valid, but it's up to the entrepreneur to interpret that advice and then make the right decision for their business
at that particular time as well.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm going through it, as well with a startup, and I'm having to listen to my own advice to start with, exactly what you're saying, and lots of other people's, because even the business that I'm founding at the moment is at a different time. The market's different. We were talking just before we came on air here. The investment landscape is different.
Yes.
Post-COVID, energy crisis, all that's happening, in the UK, US, etc. at the moment, has a massive effect. So there isn't an A to Z that you can just simply follow, is there?
No, absolutely not. I wish there was.
or do you? Because here's the maybe bringing that, if you did have the A to Z, and you were talking about the the local ecosystem as well, and if we stay looking too much within our own boundaries, as it were, we get the same advice. Do we end up with the same companies, actually, who then may not be able to compete on the global stage?
Very true, very true. The A to Z would be a working document that was constantly updated. If I was to say what that would look like, it wouldn't be a book that was written at X point in time for X market, for X type of company. It would be something that would constantly evolve, and
So we shouldn't write a book then.
No, we should write a Google Docs that is currently updated with something like that. Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah.
I'm actually going to look because we've actually been given some questions, and I'm just conscious that we could talk for hours, and maybe we should.
Yes,
actually. But just some questions that have come from Inspire listeners and entrepreneurs, and here's one that comes from somebody. I'm an entrepreneur who's experiencing growth, and I'm now looking to employ someone to support with marketing and sales. That's a common one. This would be interesting to see how you answer this one. But I'm fearful that it's going to be more time-consuming training someone rather than just doing it myself. How do you make that shift from being a one-man band to training and developing and inspiring your staff? This is a podcast in its own right.
Absolutely.
But just some...
Yeah, no matter what individual or skill that you need to bring into the business or capability that you need to bring into a business, there's always that conversation as do I bring someone in to train them, or do I bring someone in who has the expertise that allows the business to progress further. So I did a lot of research when I was starting my business, and I read a lot of books. I went out there and spoke to a lot of founders, and the overwhelming response for when you're hiring people is that hire people with experience. It's the most difficult one to do because it's when you hire people with experience, they tend to be more expensive. So at the early stages, everybody's thinking, well, we can only hire a graduate, or we could only hire someone junior. And that's fine if you're only looking to preserve cash. Actually, it's a kind of double-edged sword, because the time that you then spend training that individual up, who doesn't have the experience that you need, will actually slow you down and cost you more money in the long run. So if you ask second-time founders, they always say hire experience and bring experience into business, because you end up going faster, the quality's higher, etc. Yes, it'll cost you more money, but it's worth it. So my advice would be hire someone that you don't need to train. Hire somebody that can come in and actually teach you. So from my perspective, I want to be surrounded by people that can do the things that I can't better than me, and actually I want to learn things. So I think that's really important, and it's from a founder perspective, you want to really understand what you are good at and what you're not good at, and concentrate on the things that you're good at and the things that you enjoy, and the things that can really move the business on. And sales and marketing you've got to have sales and marketing function in there, and there are a lot of really, really good sales and marketing people out there. As a founder, you are doing sales and marketing all the time.
Have to be.
All the time. So you have to develop that skill. And if you don't know how to do that, then you need to, try and work out how to do that by speaking to people who have experience in that area. So it's a hard one.
It's a hard one, actually, because if you're talking about training, I suppose there's several aspects of training as well. One is, like, if you like, the functional capabilities.
Yes.
Can you bring someone in who has developed a business or a route to market internationally? But have they done it in your specific sector? Maybe not.
Yes.
But actually, again, from experience, that's not necessarily a bad thing, because the founder has to be really clear on the vision and the direction of the company, the product, the service, etc. So that can be part of the training. But also, in some ways, a new pair of eyes. So this is coming back to the not having the A to Z. So bringing in an experienced sales and marketing person, say just do what you did before. That's also not necessarily going to grow your business in the way. But if it's someone who's, I suppose, either in a parallel market or adjacent market, who can come in and go, well, I don't know that exactly, but I can bring my experience, knowledge, skills, but to a new market, then working with the founder, that's probably when you're going to get some really good tension, because I think that's, again, we should talk about, that constructive tension between people as well. And you said about, a more experienced person, teaching you, that can have some really interesting dynamics. Not always positive, but in many ways.
No, you're absolutely right. It's a really good point, and I think it's difficult to build a team. If I was to think back when we first started the business, you hire where you think you need someone. So for example, our first hire was a embedded software designer, engineer, because we didn't have that capability. We had some capability in developing products, but we didn't have the deep software experience needed to build the product. So we knew we had a gap to fill. We brought someone in who could fill that gap. Now, we learned a lot from that hire, but we still set the direction of the product. We set the requirements. We were still, leading the business at the time. So, but we got, we had to get involved in everything. So everybody, I think that there's a key skill that when you join a very early stage startup is that, no matter who you hire, if it's your first couple of hires, they have to be have the mindset to be able to get involved in everything, and not just be doing one job that's written down on their job spec. For example, you're only going to do sales and marketing. Actually, no, we need you to do some finance, and we need you to do this, and just get stuck in, because unfortunately, there's so much to cover, and those early hires need to be able
building your first exhibition booth internationally. You're not going to be hiring local people to do that. So all hands to the pump. And actually, that's an interesting. Again, maybe we'll park that for another time. But the background of people, people who've been very, very successful in larger companies can't always, unfortunately, make that transition to small, because exactly as you said, it would be a very, very tight, very, very well-defined role.
Absolutely.
And as one of the, I suppose one of the first 2 or 3, or even the first 10 people into a startup, you are jack of all trades, but you still have to be master.
Yes.
Of your one particular. Not everybody can do that. And the recruitment process. I mean, how have you made your recruitment process robust to avoid some of these things?
It's actually one of the first hires that we brought into the company very early stage. So within the first 4 or 5 people is now our head of people, head of HR. Because we recognised that we needed to bring someone in early on who could help us tailor that process. So we've got quite a robust process now, which good filtering of CVs and good interview process, quite 3-stage interview process, which is working really well for us. I think we have obviously we need the right capabilities from people in terms of the right skills for the business at a specific time, but we also need the right mindset as well. So one of the things that we look for in all of our team is the kind of the growth mindset, the ability to come in and learn and change, and understand that the business that you've joined now is not necessarily going to be the business in 6 months' time, and therefore you have to be aware that the business is like a dynamic system which changes over time. And some people that have worked in large companies, that can be really uncomfortable. If there's lots of change continuously, uncertainty. There's always a lot of uncertainty in a startup.
Okay, so actually, I'm going to pick up on that, because where my mind was originally going was, that old cliche: the only constant in a startup is change.
Yeah.
But with change comes uncertainty. But it doesn't have to be uncertainty in many ways, because if you're going on the journey together and you're bringing everybody with you, you can avoid that uncertainty, or you can minimise the impact on the staff of uncertainty. Is that something that you've been able to do with your team as they've grown? Is sort of face those challenges together, I suppose?
Absolutely. I think it's the it's all about making sure that people believe in the mission for the business, and that we've set out a strategy. There's constant communication around what that strategy is, what it is we're trying to achieve as a business, what the next big milestone is. So trying to communicate the commercial objectives of the business, the financial objectives of the business, as well as technical and product objectives, and trying to make sure that everybody's kind of bought into that. So there is a constant need to tweak the way that you communicate with your team and make sure you're bringing them along for the journey, and also making sure that you can step in and course correct if needed as well, because yes, like everything, there's times when communication hasn't been as effective as it could have been. For example, raising money takes a lot of effort, and means that you're doing, for example, I was away raising money and maybe not doing some other things within the business that needed to be done. So you have to constantly kind of reassess those strategies for keeping everybody aligned, and but if you can continually do that, continually change the way you approach it as your team scales, keep everybody in the journey, that tends to be a big part of it.
People, businesses, communications, absolutely. And there is that theme coming through again, the A to Z, that dynamic Google Docs. Same with any business plan. It'll be the same with the communications plan as well. It's just because that's what we said 6 months ago. Yeah, and probably here we are. Nicely brings me on to maybe the next question here, which I think we can weave in here. The question is, business in general has been heavily impacted by the pandemic. What are your thoughts on this? How has it affected the migration of businesses, and how has it affected the funding landscape, and how has it affected competition locally? Right, loads of questions in one there in a way. But let's pick just generally maybe what has been the impact of the pandemic, and we've been talking about ambition, and funding. So why don't we do the general impact and how it's affected the funding landscape?
So general impact, absolutely. It's been an unprecedented situation for everyone. I think if you're an entrepreneur that has started a business and has come through the pandemic and has, entrepreneurs tend to be pretty resilient, and because of the constant change that happens within the business, they tend to be very good at reacting to external change as well as internal change within the business. So actually, the majority of entrepreneurs that I know from kind of interactions have done very well through the pandemic, because it's something that they're accustomed to. There's I think in terms of it's had huge impact on the way that we run our businesses, the way that we build our businesses, the way that I go into a few examples. So, for example, raising money, right? We raised our first our seed round with US investors during the pandemic. In pre-pandemic, we would have had to travel to the US to speak to US investors face to face. We didn't need to do that. We could do that over Zoom, which meant that it opened up, people just accepted that they had to do investment rounds, from the comfort of your home office or your bedroom or your kitchen, over Zoom. And that enabled businesses like ours to talk to VCs in New York and, across the US. That wouldn't have happened. It wouldn't have been as easy for us, and it wasn't easy, but it wouldn't have been as easy for us to do that.
Arguably more efficient.
Yes,
particularly with time
absolutely,
and costs.
Absolutely. So that's one big thing that changed, and now I think majority of investors will be quite comfortable doing an investment purely over Zoom without having to meet the founders face to face. So that's a huge shift, and it's a positive for in companies and founders here in Scotland being able to access international capital. So that's one thing. The other one is talent. So there's a huge shift in how we access talent now, and it's actually put a big strain on a company like ours, in that when we are now going to look to hire a software developer, for example, software developers can now go and command London wages because they can work from home.
Yes.
They don't need to travel to the US. They could potentially work for US companies, which has pushed the prices of talent up. And certainly for ecosystems like ours, where the cost of resource was actually pretty low compared to the rest of the world. So that's been a big thing. But there's other positives there as well. It means that as a business, we can access a global talent pool.
Yes.
As well as investors. We can use, we don't need to travel to talk to customers. So, things have become a bit more accessible from that perspective. So, doing business is very different to what it was. But it's quite an interesting.
It is, and it's arguable, and it's obviously the wrong catalyst because of the devastating effect that the pandemic's had on so many people, of all walks of life, and globally. But it's maybe what needed to happen in business to become more efficient. Not always be jumping on planes to go and have face-to-faces and then come back again. Overcome some of the issues you were talking about with communications. If you're traveling all the time doing investor pitches and presentations, and you're not around your team or you're not at the center of things, that's when communication potentially
absolutely. I would say though, nothing beats a face-to-face.
But
nothing beats a face-to-face.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think, but what I've discovered, because the business I was talking about earlier on, we started it about the 15th of March 2020, so a week before everything went into lockdown. But interestingly enough, the relationships that we were able to build with customers over Zoom, unfortunately, a lot of doctors weren't able to work, because of the situation in hospitals. They were eager and keen to discuss with us. I would argue that we've probably got the strongest customer discovery, of any business in our sector, because we had access to them.
Fantastic.
But now we've got the ability. So I mentioned I'm jumping on a plane tomorrow, talking about not getting on planes, and I'm building on a relationship that was built entirely over Zoom for 2 years, that now in a face-to-face is so much stronger than it ever was. But I'm completely with you. People, again, I've come up with a few cliches already, but people do buy people. Yeah. And if they can see that you're willing and prepared to do it, but at the right time for your business and the right time for them.
Absolutely.
I think that's amazing. You are conscious of time.
Yeah.
But I think we've got a little bit longer, and I don't want to get through some more of these questions. You mentioned about resilience, and entrepreneurs, and particularly at these times, it's almost as if there's an extra, turbo boost that's switched on when things get difficult for entrepreneurs. But this question talks to that. Every successful entrepreneur experiences failure. Yes, I know that. And at Strathclyde Inspire, we often talk about the importance of resilience and actively encourage our staff and students to have the self-belief to overcome and learn from setbacks. So this is a great question. Can you share with us your biggest failure, if you're prepared to do that, and what you learned from that experience?
Wow, there's so many. I think I think this was a similar question came up during the fireside chat.
Yeah, it was.
And I gave the political answer there as well, and I'll do the same again today. I don't think there's one failure. I think, but lots of failures constantly, whether it's the way that you conduct a customer pitch or an investor pitch, whether it's making a wrong hire or turning up a bit tired to and making a wrong giving a wrong impression to one of your team members, or there's lots of mistakes that you make as a founder, but all learning opportunities. And you know, the last 4 years, you know, I've gone through an incredible growth journey. But it's because I've made a lot of mistakes and tried to learn from them, and tried to then, you know, okay, you know, it's important that I now then push that back into, and then encouraging the team to do the same.
Yeah.
So I constantly talk about, you know, I'm happy for you to make mistakes. Don't make the same mistake twice.
Yes, yeah, absolutely,
but you know, because that's an issue. But help people, like, give them that safe space to make mistakes, create an environment where it's okay to make a mistake, but learn from it. And because as an organization, you're going to make lots of mistakes, but you have to be in a learning organization. So you have to try and try to, you know, adapt, do lesson learns, for example, you know, understand, take feedback, you know, push that back into how you improve. And no one big mistake, I don't think.
No, that's interesting. And then, as you say, that the safe space, and I think that's because of what we've been through in the last couple of years, because of the way that work generally has changed as well.
Yeah,
it is more difficult to get people together as a team, you know, and you know, as humans, I believe anyway that humans need other humans to bounce off and, you know, be in the same vicinity as well. But creating a safe space that you're talking about has a great effect for the business. But we have to remember our people as well. And if you can create that safe space, and it's not criticizing them as a person, it's encouraging them to push the boundaries a little, because again, as we were saying, you're never going to become better unless you can just push those boundaries. But allow that to happen, not knock them down, but let's learn from that in the right way. I think that's incredible for a business.
Creating that safe space to try things, take risk, is directly links in with the first topic of conversation around ambition, right? So you know, if you don't take risk, you know, you can't achieve your ambition. Okay, it's almost impossible. So, you know, as entrepreneurs, we have to get comfortable taking risk, big risks. You know,
absolutely,
and also the advisors and investors within the ecosystem have to get comfortable taking bigger risks, right? And have to encourage founders to take big risks, because with those big risks come big rewards, and I think that's really important. So creating a safe space as a, you know, from a company perspective is really important, but also create a safe space within an ecosystem. So like encouraging companies to go for it, but also, you know, celebrate the fact that if a company fails, like, you know, that's actually a massive learning. So like if a company fails, right, then, and you know, I'm talking as a first time founder who doesn't want to fail, who wants to keep going. So at the same time, you know, if the company was to fail, there'd be huge learnings that makes, you know, the people that have been involved in their business extremely valuable for other businesses. So it's like that whole feedback loop that comes into the ecosystem, where it's like, actually, you know, you want to encourage that, and you know, you've heard the old you know, the saying, you know, fail fast, and you know, no one's better at it than kind of Elon Musk, and, you know, kind of the way that he founded and grew SpaceX. So you know, failing fast is quite important, but learning fast from those mistakes is extremely important. So.
And not being afraid to, as you say, to learn from it and to share that experience. And I was just going to give one example of a failure of mine. Was the first startup I did on my own. And my mistake was not being ambitious enough, interesting enough in fundraising, and took a safe route when one investor said, yes, we'll take you down this pathway, and it didn't happen. It meant I'd lost 9 months with anybody else for the backup plan, so therefore we'd lost market opportunity. Never do that again. But, you know, it's a great way to learn. And it's a great way to make you resilient. Completely agree with the ecosystem. I think the ecosystem has to be less of a safe, so it can be a safe space, but not a safety net, if you like.
Yeah.
Because sometimes we have to take, mixing up metaphors, they have to take the stabilizers off the bike sometimes just to let people, as you say, go for the big market opportunities out there and not hold them back.
Definitely.
Well, I think that's been excellent. I've loved doing that, and I think we could chat for ages. Maybe we'll come back, but
definitely.
But thank you, Alan. I think our time here has ended. Thank you, everybody, for listening in and for watching. Remember to hit the subscribe button on the Strathclyde Inspire podcast channel. And if the monthly release of podcasts isn't enough for you, be sure to follow us on Instagram, LinkedIn and Twitter. Just search for Strathclyde Inspire. But Allan Cannon once again, I'm David Bowie. Thank you very much.